I remember the day the stars themselves seemed to hold their breath. The chamber of the Galactic Council, vast, crystalline, ancient, floated in the hollow of a dying star. Rings of bioluminescent light traced its tiers, each orbit crammed with envoys, admirals, monarchs, and scholars. 1,000 worlds spoke through that single sphere of judgment, and every word that echoed through it carried the weight of empires. And then came him, Warlord Korth-Va of the Tarkin Dominion, giant of iron and fury, draped in the black armor of extinct beasts. His footsteps cracked the marble beneath him, his scent of scorched metal cutting through the sterile air. Every movement was a proclamation. I am power incarnate. He didn't bow. None of his kind ever did. Instead, he struck his gauntlet against the dais, and the sound was like a hammer shattering the quiet of eternity. The translator nodes flickered under the force of his voice. Words, he growled, mean nothing from mouths that have never tasted war. Let them prove their worth, not through speeches, but through blood. Ripples of shock cascaded through the council tiers. Some hissed, some jeered. Others, the older species, leaned forward in morbid curiosity. A challenge, a duel, was forbidden by custom, yet not by law, and the target of his contempt? Humanity. They were newcomers to the council, soft-skinned and short-lived, still smelling of their blue cradle world. Their ambassadorial delegation sat in the lower tier, 5 figures in dark uniforms, unarmed, unarmored, their eyes steady despite the tempest surrounding them. I remember thinking how small they looked, how fragile, how unprepared. When the challenge echoed across the chamber, every species turned to see if the humans would flinch. Most expected pleading, others expected silence. Instead, a woman stood. She was not tall, not radiant, not monstrous like the legends our warriors aspired to be. She was ordinary, but her stillness drew the eye like gravity. The lights bent around her face, reflecting in her eyes, a galaxy mirrored in the calm of a storm not yet unleashed. She stepped forward, hands clasped behind her back. Her voice carried not through volume, but through certainty. If the Dominion demands proof of humanity's worth, we will oblige. The translators hesitated for a fraction of a second, as though the words themselves refused to be rendered into alien tongue. When they finally echoed in a dozen dialects, a murmur spread like a tide. Korth-Va tilted his head, mandibles flexing in amusement. "You," he asked, "a diplomat dares to face a warlord?" "A diplomat," she said, "is the only one who should." Laughter broke like thunder across the tiers. Even I laughed, a hollow sound born of disbelief. What arrogance! What suicidal courage! But she did not smile, nor did she defend herself. She simply met the gaze of the creature twice her height and thrice her age, and something shifted. I could not name it then. It was not fear nor defiance. It was clarity. She turned to the council. By the ancient codes of praxis, I accept. Every voice in the chamber froze. Even the light seemed to dim, refracting through the crystalline walls like the slow heartbeat of fate. The speaker of the council, an ancient being older than written law, finally stirred. Its voice echoed like wind through hollow stone. The codes are clear. The challenge stands. The duel will be recognized. I remember the way the humans exchanged no words, no visible sign of concern. One of them, a tall man in a black coat, placed a hand on her shoulder. A gesture. Perhaps farewell. Perhaps faith. And Korth-Va smiled then, a predator's smile, teeth glinting beneath the artificial suns. "Prepare your burial words. Human." "Prepare your conscience," she replied. The tension that followed was unbearable. Even through the air filtration systems, I could taste the ozone of rising power. The Council's diplomatic channels exploded with activity. Alliances shifting, wagers placed, predictions calculated. Some claimed this would end humanity's brief experiment in galactic diplomacy. Others whispered darker things. That perhaps the humans wanted this. I remember watching them leave the chamber, walking in perfect calm as the storm gathered behind them. No armor, no weapons, no fear, only purpose. Something in me, the part bred for conquest and survival, recoiled from that calm. It was not arrogance. It was not ignorance. It was certainty, the kind that comes not from believing you will win, but from knowing that what happens next will matter forever. As the council dissolved into chaos, I caught the last glimpse of her retreating figure, her voice low as she spoke to her aide. "The galaxy watches for strength," she said. "Let it learn what strength truly is," and in that moment, I understood none of it. But later, after the duel, after the silence, after everything that followed, I would remember that line like a curse, for the galaxy did watch, and it never forgot. They said the old codes had not been invoked in 10 millennia. Not since the age of shattered crowns, when disputes were settled in blood instead of reason. And yet by the decree of the council, the duel was sanctioned, lawful, though all knew it was barbaric. Korthva accepted the verdict with a snarl that echoed through the atrium halls of the Tarkin War Dome. For him, honor was not an abstract philosophy. It was currency, oxygen, faith. He had killed for less than insult. To challenge him was to step willingly into annihilation. For 3 cycles, he trained beneath the black suns of Narix, where gravity doubled and light itself bled crimson. His twin blades, oath and consequence, carved through obsidian statues of fallen foes. His soldiers, my brothers of the Obsidian Guard, watched in reverent silence as their master perfected every motion of slaughter. Sparks fell like dying stars, and with each strike, his voice growled prayers to the gods of conquest. A duel of words? He spat once, driving his blade through a training construct. "Then I shall make her words bleed," we laughed. Of course we did. The idea of facing a diplomat in single combat was a grotesque parody of war. Yet the challenge was binding. The arena was chosen. The terms, to yield or die, were sealed in the archives of Praxis 9. Still, rumors spread faster than radiation. Some said the human woman had once been a soldier, disguised in diplomacy. Others whispered she carried invisible weapons, nanoblades, kinetic fields, or perhaps something stranger, something only humans could invent. Every speculation made her more dangerous in our minds, and thus, more worthy. But when I first saw her after the declaration, all those myths shattered like glass. She stood in the council's east wing, a place of quiet and shadow, surrounded by her aides. No armor, no guards, no training implements, only hollow screens hovering before her, projections of ancient treaties, cultural archives, recordings of Korthva's past speeches and campaigns. She was studying him, not his fighting form, his soul. I remember leaning against the marble pillar, sneering as she moved between the screens, eyes gliding over history like a blade through silk. "Preparing for your execution, little human?" I taunted in my native tongue. Her head turned slightly. The translator node on her collar pulsed once, translating her calm voice into mine. "No. Preparing for his." Her tone was flat. Not defiant, not angry, certain. It was then I noticed something that unsettled me. Her breathing. Slow, deliberate, perfectly synchronized with the pulse of the hololights. There was rhythm in it, a discipline that was not physical but mental, as if she trained her presence the way warriors trained muscle. When Korthva arrived for the formal signing of the duel's terms, the chamber erupted in spectacle. The council walls retracted to reveal the void beyond, nebulae drifting like spilled paint. Every species that mattered attended, their holographic likenesses flickering in their orbits. He strode forward, a mountain of armor and pride, while she remained seated, legs crossed, hands folded, her gaze unwavering. The difference between them was absurd. He looked like a storm carved into flesh. She looked like silence given form. Korthva's claws tapped the table. "You understand the stakes, human? No council protection, no surrender. The duel ends when one yields or perishes." "I understand," she said softly. "Then you are a fool." "Perhaps." She tilted her head. "Or perhaps you have mistaken survival for victory." The chamber hummed. Even the translation systems hesitated, as though language itself needed a moment to digest her meaning. The warlord leaned close, eyes burning like twin furnaces. "Do you mock the codes?" "I honor them," she replied. "But I do not fight with steel." A murmur erupted through the tears, gasps, laughter, outrage. Even among the Obsidian Guard, a ripple of disbelief spread like wildfire. To reject the weapon was to reject the duel itself, yet the council speaker, ancient and inscrutable, raised its hand. "The old codes require only the acceptance of combat. The choice of weapon is one's own." Silence followed. Korthva's gaze hardened into something close to hate. "Then bring your words, human," he growled. "I will drown them in your blood." She stood then, not tall, not menacing, but centered, grounded in a way that made even the air seem to pause. Her eyes locked with his. "We will see whose blood truth demands." That moment lingered in me like radiation, slowly burning, invisible, irreversible. Later, as we prepared Korthva's warship for departure to Praxis 9, I replayed her words in my mind, searching for weakness in them. There was none. Only conviction, layered with something I could not name. Was it faith? Madness? Both? That night, under the violet glow of the Dominion's war banners, I found myself standing before the observation deck, watching our fleet ignite the dark. The duel had become more than spectacle. It was prophecy in motion. Every empire waited for blood. Every ruler hoped the humans would be broken into obedience, and yet deep within the core of my being, where instincts of survival and conquest entwined, a single, treacherous thought took root. What if they could not be broken? What if this frail diplomat carried not weapons, but something worse, something unseen, something that turned strength against itself? The question haunted me long after the fleet vanished into jump space, and when I closed my eyes, I could still see her face, calm, fearless, and infinitely patient. For the first time in centuries, I felt the unfamiliar weight of uncertainty, and it was heavier than any armor I had ever worn. Praxis 9 was not a moon, it was a wound. A barren scar of dust and obsidian stone orbiting the fractured remains of a gas giant. Long ago, the ancients had called it the Anvil of Gods, where champions settled the disputes of empires before the eyes of creation. But the gods were long dead, and their blood had turned to rust beneath the dust storms. And now, the duel of the age would stain that sacred ground once more. The arena stretched across 10 kilometers of scorched rock, encased in an atmospheric dome that shimmered against the void. Around it, fleets from every empire formed rings of fire, ships in perfect orbit, weapons dimmed but ready. To some, this was a spectacle. To others, it was history watching itself. The Warlord arrived first. His descent shattered the calm, his ship, the Crucible, burning through the thin sky like a comet. When he stepped onto the platform, the ground trembled. His armor reflected the dying sun, black and crimson, etched with runes of victory. The twin blades, oath and consequence, were forged from the core of a dead star, each stroke of the forge rumored to have cost a life. His very presence distorted the dust around him. We, the Obsidian Guard, stood at the perimeter, our visors tinted against the glare. I remember feeling something primal stir within me, pride, hunger, the certainty of our master's triumph. And then the humans arrived. Their transport was unremarkable. White hull, unarmed, its engines whispering rather than roaring. When the ramp extended, the silence was so total that even the winds of Praxis seemed to pause in reverence or disbelief. She walked alone, Elise Ward, the human diplomat. No armor, no guards, no adornment save for the small silver translator at her throat and a datapad clutched loosely in her hand. Her dark uniform was plain, her expression unreadable. If she was afraid, she hid it well. The crowd, if one could call a billion holographic spectators a crowd, erupted across the comm channels. My visor filled with chatter, wagers, mockery, prophecy. Some called her brave, others suicidal. A few whispered what I dared not. Perhaps she knew something the rest of us did not. The Warlord approached, each step carving thunder into the dust. He towered over her, shadows swallowing her frame. The visual feeds captured every angle, the monstrous veteran of 1,000 wars facing the fragile envoy of a young world. He saluted in the ancient fashion, blades crossed over his chest, lowering in respect for the condemned. "You may speak your last words." "Human," he said, voice like grinding metal. She raised her eyes to meet his and said, quietly, "I already have." Then she stepped back, datapad in hand, and waited. The council's sigils burned above the arena. The horn of judgment, a sound older than history, roared across the dome, reverberating through our bones. The duel had begun. Korth Va moved like gravity given flesh. His first strike split the ground, molten shards flying as the shockwave hurled sand into the air. The human didn't move. The blade passed within a breath of her, carving a trench into the dust. The crowd gasped. He turned, spinning in a deadly arc. The second strike cutting through where she should have been, but she wasn't there. She had stepped aside, not with speed, but with timing, each movement deliberate, precise, as if she had already mapped his rage before it began. She spoke as he struck again. "You've conquered 73 worlds." He hesitated, for the briefest moment, the question hanging strange in the smoke. "You've enslaved 12 sentient species." The blade paused mid-swing. "How many of them remember your name?" The question didn't come as accusation. It came as inquiry, sharp and clean. I could feel the tension coil tighter with every word. Korth Va lunged, roaring, his weapon cleaving stone, dust, and air. But her voice wove through the sound, calm and steady. "How many of your soldiers died believing you fought for them?" That stopped him. Just for a breath. But in battle, a breath was eternity. The Obsidian Guard exchanged uneasy glances. This was not combat. It was dissection. He swung again, furious, wounded not in flesh, but in pride. The blade missed. She stood still, eyes never leaving him. "You call this honor?" she asked. "Honor that feeds on fear, that writes its name in ash?" The words echoed, amplified by the translators across 100 languages. And across the galaxy, silence spread. Even those who had come to cheer his victory now watched in fascination, unsure of what they were seeing. Korth Va bellowed, voice shaking the dome. "You dare speak of honor who has never fought a war?" "You're wrong," she said softly. "Every diplomat fights one." Her datapad flickered, projecting an image, one I recognized instantly. A planet once vibrant, now hollowed and gray. Tarkin wore banners planted over cities turned to dust. "This was Kirellon," she said. "Before the Dominion's glory reached it." "Before your blade cleansed it of life." He froze. His armor systems flickered as the telemetry feeds spiked. Rage, confusion, shame, things no one had ever seen in Korth Va's eyes. "Do you even remember why you invaded?" she asked. He hesitated. The silence after her words was unbearable. Because they refused tribute." "No," she whispered. "Because your council feared they might unite." He roared and struck again, his blade cleaving the hologram in two, sparks scattering like stars. "Enough." She didn't flinch. Didn't even step back. "The duel is not about me, Warlord," she said. "It's about you. About what your kind made you believe you are." The way she said it, gentle, sorrowful, was worse than mockery. It was pity. And pity to a Tarkin was poison. He lunged again, blade raised high. But his movements had changed, slower, unsteady. The strikes that once shattered stone now glanced harmlessly off air. The arena trembled beneath him, his rage transforming into something else, uncertainty. I could see it now, clear as day. She wasn't fighting him. She was dismantling belief, piece by piece. Every word she spoke stripped away another layer of the myth he wore like armor, his history, his faith, his purpose. At last, she spoke one final question, one that fell like a quiet storm across the battlefield. "When you've conquered everything, Warlord, what will be left of you to rule?" The Warlord froze mid-strike. The blade stopped an inch from her chest. The galaxy held its breath. And I, soldier of the Dominion, child of conquest, felt my heart falter. Because I saw something I had never seen before in the Warlord's face. Doubt, the monster who had torn. Empires apart now stared at his own reflection in her eyes and saw nothing there to fight. The horns blared once more, signaling the duel's midpoint. Neither had yielded, neither had bled. Yet everyone watching knew the momentum had shifted. The humans, with no armor, no weapons, no shields, had already struck their blow, and it had landed deeper than any blade could reach. There is a moment in every battle when sound itself dies. Not because the fighting ends, but because something deeper, more terrible, has been understood. Praxis 9 stood beneath that silence now. The Warlord's roars still shook the air. His blade still carved arcs of molten light, but the meaning behind them was gone. What once felt inevitable now felt desperate. Every strike landed harder, but less certain, as though he was trying to drown out something only he could hear. That voice, the human's voice. Soft, clear, unwavering. You fight for fear, not for honor. The words cut through the static of the translators, carried through every relay, every comm line, every world that watched. And somehow, though the sentence was simple, it emerged perfect in every tongue. Not as translation, but as truth. I felt it strike inside me, the way plasma strikes the hull of a ship, searing, unstoppable. The obsidian guard shifted uneasily. My brothers, monuments of obedience, stood motionless, but I saw their fingers twitch upon their weapons. We were bred to silence, trained to ignore emotion. Yet something inside each of us cracked, small and invisible. Korthva's next blow missed entirely. His weapon struck stone, sending shards into the air, dust mingling with the hum of failing gravity fields. Sparks reflected in his eyes, wild and hollow. He swung again, faster, angrier, his voice a broken growl. You know nothing of honor, you who hide behind words and pity. She took a step closer. Just one. You call it pity, she said. But it's mercy. And mercy is the thing you were taught to fear. For a long moment, even the atmosphere generators seemed to falter. The feed from my visor began to flicker, sensors confused by the stillness between them. It was not a duel anymore. It was an unraveling. He struck again, missed, again, missed. Each motion bled purpose. His breathing grew erratic. The great warlord of the Dominion, whose name once silenced nations, was now fighting a shadow of his own creation. And the human stood calm, her voice steady, each phrase landing like precision strikes. You've mistaken obedience for loyalty. You've mistaken silence for peace. You've mistaken fear for respect, he bellowed in rage, swinging both blades at once. The clash of metal against stone screamed through the dome, sparks painting the air like rain. He advanced, but she did not retreat. You think strength means never stopping? She continued, even as he closed the distance. But the strongest thing any being can do is stop. Her voice was low, too low for human ears to dominate the roar of battle, but every translator amplified it perfectly, a single clear note cutting through chaos. I realized then that she wasn't just speaking to him. She was speaking to us, to the galaxy. Empires watched through holographic projections. Billions of beings across 1,000 systems, all listening, all hearing those same words. And something strange happened. The crowd that had come to watch blood now sat in silence. Fleets that had tuned in for glory found only reflection. Even the council, those eternal arbiters of arrogance, spoke no commentary. Because what she said next, no language could soften. You are not fighting me, Warlord. You're fighting the emptiness your victories left behind. Korthva stopped mid-swing. His blades hovered in the air, trembling. The dust around him hung suspended in the low gravity, like a halo of ruin. Enough, he rasped. You twist words into weapons. No, she whispered. I simply remind you what you buried to become one. The tremor in his arm deepened. His claws tightened on his blade. The heat sensors on my visor flared, his heart rate spiking to unsustainable levels. But he didn't strike again. He couldn't. In that instant, I understood what I was witnessing. Humans do not fight for dominance. They fight for definition. Their weapons are not forged of metal, but of meaning. And meaning, when wielded without hate, is the sharpest blade of all. I looked at her then, not as prey, not as anomaly, but as something I could not define. She stood amid the wreckage of his fury, untouched, her uniform darkened by ash and shadow, her eyes reflecting the dying glow of the Warlord's armor. Her face showed no triumph. "Only sorrow. They told me Tarkans fight for glory," she said quietly. "But you fight for fear. Fear that if you ever stop fighting, you'll have to face what you've done." The blade in his hand faltered. The sound of it striking the ground echoed like a thunderclap across the dome. Gasps erupted across the fleet channels. To drop one's weapon was not merely to pause, it was to yield, even if the formal surrender had not been declared. And still she did not move. She did not approach nor strike. She simply looked at him, at the creature who had enslaved worlds, burned civilizations, and carved his legend into time, and she offered him silence. It was unbearable. It was mercy. It was victory. The Council's sensors logged every heartbeat, every fluctuation of breath, every tremor in the Warlord's frame. To us, it was more intimate than any confession. He looked up at her finally, eyes hollow, voice cracking through the comms. "What do you know of war, human?" Her answer came not as a speech, but as a whisper that reached every world. Enough to know it never ends where you think it does. The silence that followed was worse than death. The duel had become a mirror, and all who watched could no longer look away. And I, soldier of the Dominion, saw my reflection there too. Warrior, servant, believer, stripped bare by a voice that had never raised a weapon. In that stillness, I realized what humanity truly was. They were not conquerors of flesh. They were conquerors of truth. And truth cuts deeper than plasma. There are moments the universe holds its breath, moments so fragile that even light seems afraid to move. Praxis 9 became such a place. The Warlord stood in silence, dust coiling around him like the ghosts of every battle he'd ever fought. His armor, once radiant with molten sigils of victory, now looked heavy, ashen, cracked, humanized by defeat he could not yet name. Across from him, Elise Ward stood unarmed. Her hands rested loosely at her sides. Her gaze never wavered. It was not defiance. It was understanding. For an instant, I thought it was over. The galaxy had seen enough humiliation. Surely the Council would intervene, declare the human victorious on principle alone. But pride, especially the kind bred over generations, dies slowly. Korthva's fingers twitched, then curled. The Warlord roared, a sound so immense that the arena's sound dampeners overloaded and raw thunder rolled through the vacuum canopy. The very dust seemed to recoil. He charged. It was not rage that drove him now. It was despair, a need to prove, even to himself, that the laws of strength still held meaning, that a single human word could not undo an empire's legacy. He moved like the storm of a dying god, each step shaking the ground. His blade ignited again, a pillar of obsidian plasma splitting the air in molten arcs. Every motion was perfect, an execution refined through centuries of war, and she did not move, not an inch. The translator at her chest pulsed with her steady breathing. No shields activated, no counterstrike initiated. She simply waited. My instinct screamed. The guard around me gripped their weapons, torn between witnessing history and stopping it. This was suicide, I thought. Surely no creature, no matter how bold, would face death this way. But then, the impossible. The blade stopped. Not through interference, not through force. It stopped because his hand refused to finish the motion. The edge of the plasma blade hovered just above her throat, humming with restrained death. I saw the tremor travel from his arm through the weapon, saw the Warlord's eyes, wide, unblinking, breaking beneath the unbearable reflection of himself. He had fought 1,000 wars. He had crushed rebellion, burned planets, drowned civilizations. And yet now, facing one unarmed human, he could not strike. The silence that followed was not peace. It was revelation. For the first time in my service, I saw my commander weep. Not from pain, but from clarity. The sound was raw, half snarl, half sob, as the great blade fell from his grasp and struck the stone with a shudder that echoed through the moons of praxis. Sparks leapt upward, then faded, leaving only the faint sound of breath. Korthva dropped to one knee, then both. His claws scraped the dust, digging furrows that seemed to swallow him whole. He tried to speak, but the words fractured in his throat. Across every fleet, in every chamber of the watching galaxy, billions of beings fell silent. No translator could soften what we were witnessing. No doctrine could contain it. The human approached slowly. No triumph in her expression. No mockery. Only sorrow and something deeper. Empathy so profound it seemed alien in itself. "It's over," she said softly. The translator carried her voice across 1,000 systems. But it wasn't the sound that mattered. It was the stillness that followed it. She knelt beside him, her shadow falling across the broken sigils on his armor. The Warlord's great hands, claws that had torn ships apart, now shook like those of a frightened child. "Why? Can't I?" he rasped. She looked at him as though speaking to all of us. "Because the war you've been fighting wasn't with us," she said. "It was with yourself." He trembled. A tear traced a line through the dust on his face. His breaths came ragged, uneven. For the first time, the Warlord of the Dominion looked small. I felt it then, what the humans carried that we did not. Not superiority, not technology, but something unbearably human. The will to face violence and choose not to return it. It was strength in its purest form, terrifying in its restraint. The blade still burned faintly between them, the molten edge cooling into black glass. When she reached out her hand, not as a conqueror, but as an equal, the sight of it fractured the very meaning of victory. Every empire watching, every ruler who had ever defined power by dominance, saw their reflection crumble in that gesture. Korthva stared at her hand for a long time. His eyes flicked toward the sky, to the ships that bore witness, to the Council's unseen gaze. I could feel the calculation inside him. The shame, the pride, the centuries of blood that demanded he refuse. But he didn't. Slowly, painfully, he took her hand. And in that motion, the galaxy broke. Not with explosions, not with screams, but with understanding. Because the act of mercy, the acceptance of defeat by choice, was something none of us had considered a form of power until that instant. The arena lights dimmed, signaling the duel's conclusion. The Council's seal appeared in the sky, confirming what the universe already knew. Humanity had won. But there were no cheers. No anthems, only silence, the kind that changes everything. Korthva bowed his head, his voice a whisper carried by open channels. "I yield." The words were heavier than any decree. He had not lost to her strength. He had surrendered to her truth. And I, an obsidian guard sworn to serve him, felt the weight of something ancient lift from my chest. The galaxy had always worshipped power. But that day, for the first time, we understood it. Elise Ward rose, still holding his hand, and said quietly, "Then the war is over." But even as she spoke, I knew the war she ended was not his alone. It was ours. It was mine. I looked upon humanity with new eyes, not as a species to be measured or feared, but as something entirely other. They did not seek to rule the stars. They sought to heal them, and that, I realized, was what made them unstoppable. History does not shatter, it folds. One truth replaces another, and the universe must rearrange itself to survive the realization. Praxis 9 was silent for 3 full rotations after the duel. Not a single ship moved. Not a single broadcast dared speak first. Even the Warlord's banners, those vast obsidian standards that once blanketed the skies of conquered worlds, hung motionless, untouched by wind or will. I remember walking across the cooled arena stones, my boots crunching over glass dust where 1,000 eyes had watched empires die. The human delegation was gone. No parades, no declarations. They had come, spoken, and vanished into the void, leaving behind the echo of something that felt like truth. Korth Va did not return to the Dominion. He summoned his generals aboard the flagship Torashke, the fortress ship whose shadow alone could eclipse a moon. I stood behind him as he addressed the Council of War for the last time. His voice was calm, stripped of its thunder. "Power," he said, "is not the right to rule. It is the courage to listen." Those words should have been impossible from a mouth that had once devoured stars. But he meant them. I saw it in his eyes, the same eyes that once glowed with unquenchable hunger now filled with something heavier than regret. Understanding. He laid down his command sigil, an obsidian shard etched with the names of his fallen, and left it upon the command dais. "No empire," he said, "that fears words deserves to rule." And then he walked away, not as a warlord, not as a conqueror, but as a man undone and reborn in the same breath. I had followed him into 100 battles, through fire and through the void. But that moment, his quiet departure, was the only time I felt fear. Because it meant the world we knew was over. The Galactic Council met in emergency session 3 cycles later. The chamber that once glimmered with certainty now trembled with dissent. The Eridani refused to sit beside the Vian. The Tarkans, leaderless, were suddenly silent, their fleets adrift without orders. Entire empires turned inward, questioning the very foundation of their strength, and at the center of it all sat the human delegation, calm, silent, watching. Ambassador Ward spoke only once, and even through the live feed, I could feel her words settle like gravity. "You have mistaken fear for order," she said. "Dominance for unity. If our existence unsettles you, perhaps it is not us you fear, but what you might become." The words detonated quietly through the chamber. Half the council erupted in protest. The other half sat frozen, haunted by reflection. I saw species who had known only conquest pause, not from defeat but from awakening. For the first time in galactic history, no one spoke of weapons. They spoke of meaning. What does it mean to lead? To endure? To face truth without retreat? Questions humans carried into the stars like torches, and the rest of us flinched from their light. When I returned to my homeworld, I expected celebration. I expected to be hailed as witness to the Dominion's glory or its martyrdom. Instead, I found silence. Children asked me if the human really did not fight. I told them yes. They asked me if she was afraid. I told them no. And then came the question that still gnaws at me in the quiet between stars. Then why did the Warlord cry? I had no answer, not then, perhaps not even now. But in the markets and temples of my world, the stories began to spread, not of conquest but of compassion, not of victory but of choice, and everywhere leaders began to tremble. Because humanity's power was not their weapons, it was their mirror. They reflected every civilization back upon itself, forcing each to see what it feared most, not defeat, but the hollowness of its purpose. Weeks passed, and the galaxy changed. Trade routes reopened under new accords, not enforced by fleets, but by trust. The Dominion fractured, yet from its fragments rose something gentler, the Order of Praxis, founded by Korth Va himself. Its creed was simple. Honor is the courage to stand unarmed before truth. Some called it heresy. Others called it the first real peace in 10,000 years. And as for the humans, they vanished into the folds of diplomacy, leaving no monuments, no demands. Only echoes, only whispers. Rumors said they returned to their homeworld, carrying with them the data from 1,000 alien reactions, studying us as we studied them. Not for conquest, for understanding. Perhaps they were mapping the soul of the galaxy itself. I stand now at the edge of my city's sky spires, watching our banners lower for the first time in my lifetime. Children no longer learn the names of battles, but the names of truths. The world feels lighter, yet also more fragile, as if truth itself were a blade hovering at our throats. I find myself remembering her, Elise Ward, the way she stood unarmed before a god of war and did not blink. the way she dismantled empires with nothing but words and empathy. And I realize now that perhaps humanity's gift is not resilience, nor courage, nor madness. Perhaps it is their ability to translate meaning into power. They do not conquer worlds. They conquer the idea of what a world should be. They do not destroy empires. They dismantle the lies that built them, and that is far more dangerous. When I close my eyes, I still hear her voice echoing across the council chamber. We do not fight with steel. At the time, I thought it arrogance. Now I know it was prophecy. For when humanity arrived among the stars, they did not bring conquest. They brought reflection, and in that reflection we found ourselves unworthy until we dared to become more. Years passed, and the memory of Praxis 9 did not fade. It evolved. It began as a rumor whispered between fleets, a myth carried on encrypted channels, the story of a human who won a duel without striking a single blow. But myths have gravity. They pull truth into orbit, and soon, even the most war-hardened civilizations found themselves repeating her words as though they were law. Across the spiral arms, academies rewrote their histories. Children no longer memorized the timelines of conquests. They studied the silence. They learned of the woman who stood unarmed before the Dominion's might and redefined what it meant to be strong. The duel of Praxis 9 became more than history. It became scripture. On Eridani Prime, the academies inscribed her final words into the spires of their learning domes. In the Dominion remnants, warriors carved her name into their armor before battle, not as a mark of defiance, but as remembrance. And in the halls of the Galactic Council, a single phrase was engraved into the dais where Korthva once stood. Honor is not victory. Honor is understanding. It was strange, even to me, to see how swiftly the galaxy adapted to something it had once feared. Empires that had crushed planets began opening embassies instead of armories. Armies became relief fleets. Commanders became teachers. For the first time in millennia, the stars glimmered with possibility rather than conquest. And yet, humanity never sought recognition. They declined monuments, refused tributes. When the Council offered to name a new sector after them, they refused that too. They said, if peace must wear a name, it was never peace to begin with. To many, that sounded like humility. But I knew better. It was strategy, the quiet kind only humans seemed to master, because they understood something the rest of us did not. That true power does not announce itself. It listens, it waits, and when it speaks, the universe bends to hear it. I met her again, many cycles later. Elise Ward, older now, her hair touched by the pale silver of age, her voice softer, though no less certain. It was at a summit on Virel Station, orbiting a neutral world lit by 3 suns. I had come as an envoy of what remained of the Dominion. She had come representing Earth, though she wore no insignia, no medals. Just the same black uniform, now faded with time. When I saw her, I felt the same tremor I had felt on Praxis 9, the quiet gravity that surrounded her. The kind that could make even warlords hesitate. She recognized me, though I never spoke during the duel. Perhaps she saw the reflection of memory in my eyes. We spoke briefly, 2 relics of a moment that changed everything. You rebuilt the Dominion, she said. We tried, I replied. Without conquest. Without chains. And did it work? I hesitated, then answered truthfully. For the first time in history. We are not at war, she smiled then. A small, quiet smile that felt like the sunrise on a world that had never known dawn. Peace is not the absence of war, she said. It's the mastery of ourselves. Those words struck me deeper than any blade. Later, when I returned home, I heard those same words again, spoken by teachers, etched into public halls, whispered in prayer. Her sentence had become a creed, and I realized what humanity's true weapon had always been. It wasn't technology. It wasn't dominance. It was translation. They could take the language of power, of fear, of violence, of arrogance, and rewrite it into understanding. They made meaning itself a battlefield, and they always won. Now, centuries later, every civilization marks the day of Praxis as a day of silence. No wars are declared, no fleets mobilize. Even the warlike Vayan shut down their engines and hold a single minute of stillness. Not for grief. For remembrance. For the human who taught us that silence is not surrender, it is mastery. I often find myself watching the old recordings. The image of Korth Va kneeling, the blade cooling in his hands, the human's hand extended in peace. It is a moment I have seen 1,000 times, yet still, my chest tightens every time. Because in that single act, everything we believed about strength collapsed, and something greater was born. The galaxy has changed since then. Worlds once enslaved now rule themselves. Species that once warred now share knowledge across light years. And somewhere, out among the stars, humanity continues its quiet work, building, teaching, listening. They do not dominate the council, though they easily could. They do not command through fear, though every species now fears them in a new, quiet way, because we all know what it means when a human enters the room unarmed. It means the conversation is about to change the course of history, and in that realization lies the galaxy's new order. No longer the reign of strength, but the reign of meaning. I end this recollection now as the twin suns of my world sink beneath the horizon, bathing the sky in the same crimson light I once saw upon Praxis 9. I have lived long enough to see the rise and fall of empires, but I know this truth will never fade. Humanity did not conquer the stars. They awakened them. And even now, centuries later, when a human steps into a council chamber, no weapon at their side, no army at their back, the universe itself still holds its breath, because we remember, because we listened.